Hi again, Mark here from Talking Bass. This week I'm going to address something that I've been asked in the comment section quite a few times, and once again this week it popped up on one of my videos. Many players new to walking bass find a lot of information regarding playing through changes like 2-5-1s and blues progressions. And that practice is absolutely vital and probably most useful when learning to walk, but there isn't the same attention paid to walking over a single chord. Now that's obviously for good reason. You're much more likely to find yourself walking through changes than you are sitting on a static chord. But learning to walk over a single chord is still a really useful skill. Modal jazz is the most obvious place for this kind of application, but learning to walk over one chord is also great for practicing chord tones and scales over the whole fretboard, and it also gives you the chance to experiment with a variety of chord tones, scales and chromatic notes within one tonality. This kind of walking can be really tough when you're getting started because you can quickly run out of vocabulary and it forces you to think up lots of new ideas while exercising your ear on the fly. As always, the lesson material and tracks are all there over at Talking Bass, so just click the link in the info below. And if you're looking to get started with walking bass lines or looking to take a systematic approach to practicing them from beginner to an advanced level, you can also check out the Simple Steps to Walking Bass course over at the Talking Bass website under the courses menu. Again, just follow the link below for more details. So let's just jump straight into a single chord. Let's take a basic C major 7 chord. Now for those of you with very little harmony knowledge, the C major 7 chord is a C major triad with a major 7th on the top. So we have the notes C, E, G and B. Now any of you that have watched my chord tone videos will know that those chord tones, C, E, G and B, are your first port of call when looking to create any kind of content over that C major 7 chord. Those are the consonant notes because they're in the chord. Any other notes will not be in the chord and they're going to rub up against them in some way, creating dissonance. Now, this dissonance is actually a good thing and an essential part of creating any kind of musical line because you don't want everything to be totally consonant all the time. It'd get pretty boring. But we do need to start with the chord tones so we can get our heads around the skeleton of that chord. So first things first, let's play up and down that C major 7 arpeggio in quarter notes, just as we would with a walking bass line. So the notes there, if I'm playing off that C there at the 3rd fret of the A string, we have C, E, G, B, 3rd fret A string, 2nd and 5th frets on the D string, and then the 4th fret on the G string. And we could add the C up there at the octave, 5th fret of the G string. Okay, so we can just play that as if it was a walking line. So now let's try that with the backing track that I have here, which is a C major 7 chord there, just swing feel. Okay, so let's try that arpeggio. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's extend that line a little by just playing the arpeggio in 2 octaves. So there's many different ways we could play this. So I could play again from that C there at the 3rd fret of the A string, come up and then shift. Instead of playing the B there at the 4th fret of the G string, I could actually play it here at the 9th fret of the D string and then just start the arpeggio again at that C on the 10th fret of the D string and then shift up again for the 7th for the C there. Okay, so back down. So I'm just taking that same arpeggio there and shifting up at the 7th. Okay, you could also play it from this C here, which would mean less shifts there. So if I come from this C at the 8th fret of the E string, come up. Okay, so that's just one way of doing it, but there are many there's many different ways of moving up through the different octaves. So you just want to know those notes, C, E, G and B, and then just play them as you find them on the neck, up and down in 2 octaves. So now let's try that with the track, and I'm going to mix it up in a few different ways. Might start here, might use a different string for the actual position shift. You want to mix it up as much as possible. So here's the track. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, as you can hear there, those notes work fine and, they all fit perfectly well with the chord. But we have a few problems. The line is very angular with, too many leaps in there. It's not very smooth. Now, arpeggios like this can be great when playing through changes in a more confined area or if you need to cover wider distances very quickly. But when playing over a single chord, all those leaps in there can get boring very quickly. So let's look at adding some extra notes in there. We're going to do this in 2 stages. First, we want to add the notes of the appropriate chord scale into the mix, which basically bridges the gaps between those arpeggio notes, making for a smoother line in seconds rather than thirds. Then we want to add chromatic notes between the scale notes, which makes things even smoother and gives us more melodic options. It also allows us to work within smaller distances and makes, for a much more jazzy sound. So what scale are we going to use over this C major 7? Well, it's going to be the C major scale. We basically take the arpeggio and then we can add the natural extensions in there. So C, E, G and B are the chord tones, and we can add the major 9th or 2nd, which is D. We can add the perfect 4th, which is F, and the major 6th, which is the 13th. Okay, so there I've just used the natural 2nd and 6th and that perfect 4th, which gives us the C major scale. So that's how you can quickly work out a chord scale to work over a chord. There are many different ways that you could do this, especially in modal music, because, as long as those chord tones are correct, the other notes around there are less important. They're going to be the kind of flavor notes in there. So, some people might use a Lydian scale by, using a sharpened 4th in there. You could even use the flattened 2nd and the flattened 6th, depending on what you want to do. Really, the chord tones are the most important part in there, and then the other notes around there kind of create the modality, okay? But for this example, we're going to stick to the most basic one, which is that C major scale. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and I'm sure most of you know that scale already. So let's have a try at playing that C major scale over the C major 7 chord. And what we're going to do is use the 7th below the root note to turn around each time, just so it works rhythmically, because it's a 7-note scale, okay? So with the track, let's just try playing up and down that C major scale, okay? So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That 7th on the bottom there. B, C. Then I've just moved up into this higher position here. So there's the 8th fret of the E string for the root. Okay. Now let's try 2 octaves. And just as with the arpeggio, there are a multitude of different ways that you can play it. You could start there at the 3rd fret, you could start here at the 8th fret. The notes are just the notes. So you really want to be able to map these out and, try it with many different, position shifts. Okay? So I'm just going to run up and down it first of all. So I'm gonna change this a little in a sec, but we're just going to try up and down that scale, okay? So here's the track. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now you'll notice something when I do that it just sounds a little bit odd, as if it's not matching up rhythmically. Now think back to what I did with the chord tones. I actually used the 7th when we got back down to the bottom so that it rhythmically matched up. And that's the problem here. As we work up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The next note, which is going to be beat 1, we're going to be on the D, okay, which is the second, which is a dissonance, okay? You know, it's still within the scale, but, you know, relative to the actual chord tones in there, that's a dissonance. So now we're on that, on beat 1, and you have to remember that beat 1, that big downbeat, is very important in terms of the, you know, the kind of rhythmic resolution there. So now we're on beat 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. We're on the A there, which is the 13th or the 6th. So again, we're on a dissonance on beat 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Again, we're on the D. 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, that's the 5th. That's not too bad. 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so that's a very important part of playing over these chords over a long period of time. You really have to think about what you're going to be landing on beat 1. Now, not necessarily every bar, but, you know, after 2 bars, 4 bars, you know, 8 bars, you have to be aware of how important it is when you land on beat 1, you know, in terms of the actual consonance or dissonance in there. And, you know, you can, you know, change that up how you want it. You know, that's however you want to express yourself. You know, you might want it to sound slightly dissonant and, you know, kind of prolong the resolution there. But again, you can hear it in action when I play that, okay? Now, one way to get around that with this 2-octave scale is to actually add an extra, or add a little enclosure in there. So as I'm coming up, let's say we start here at the 8th fret. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Instead of landing on the C on the 4 there, we could shoot up a little to the D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we don't hit the C, we hit the D instead, and then land on the C on the 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. We're on the C. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And then you could hit the B when we're coming down. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we're using the D, the second on the ascent, and then the B on the descent. So. So as a comparison, I'm going to play over the track again. I'm going to play just straight up and down with the scale, and you'll hear how it sounds a little bit odd. And then I'll try it with these nice little enclosures, you know, playing that second on the ascent and the 7th on the descent, and have a listen to how much more coherent it sounds. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. With our little enclosures. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you can hear there how we're landing on the root note on the 1, and it's, you know, it just works a lot better. And like I said, you don't have to do that. It's just that you want to be in control of that. You want to be in control of whether you're, you know, resolving on the beat 1 or whether you're adding a little bit of tension in there. Now, once again, just as with the arpeggio, that sounds okay. You know, it all works, but it's boring. You know, we don't really want to be playing the same scale up and down over a chord for hours on end. So to remedy this, what we really need to do is be building up more of a vocabulary over these chords, you know, thinking more of melodic phrases rather than just blanket scales. But before we do that, we really need to bring some chromatic notes into play, because they're going to be a key part of that vocabulary. Now, before I add the chromatics, let's just have a look at what was going on in that scalar line. Now, in the first bar, as we're walking up, okay, we're working up C, D, E, F, and then landing on the G. So that's the first beat of the next bar. And this is a very common way of playing over multiple bars. You can make use of the same scale as your palette, but we can aim for the different chord tones on beat 1. So we start with the root notes on 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've hit the 5th on beat 1, so we're aiming for the 5. The 5th is the closest note to the root in the overtone series and acts as both reinforcement of that root note and provides progression by way of that 5-to-1 cadential effect. So that's a big tip. If you want to walk over a single chord for multiple bars, try working from the root to the 5th to the root to the 5th, round and round. Use that as your target, root 5th, root 5th. It's a good first step and it always provides a strong bass line. So by bearing all this in mind, we can add a bit of interest to our scalar bass lines. So first let's walk up to that 5th as we did with the regular scale. So C, D, E, F, G. We're on beat 1, we're on the 5th, okay? Now we're on the 5th, we can look for a smooth way of reaching the root again by adding a chromatic note between two of the scale notes. So when we add chromatics, we're just filling in the gaps between the scale notes. So if you think back to the chord tones, you know, we've got thirds in there, okay? So what we're doing with the scale is bridging those gaps. So we have C to E, then E to G, then G to B for the chord tones. So with the scales, C, D, E, E, F, G, G, A, B, okay? We're just filling in the gap between the chord tones. With chromatics, we're filling in the gap between the scale notes. So between the C and the D, you could think C, C sharp, D, you know, D, D sharp, E. Try to think of chromatics in terms of moving between scale notes, you know, and ultimately chord tones, but we're looking at them more as melodic devices rather than just a blanket, you know, chromatic scale. You know. So back to the line, we've worked up to the G, C, D, E, F, G, we're on beat 1, and we want 4 notes from that G to get us to that C. So if we just work up through the scale notes, we've only got 3 notes, G, A, and B. Remember, we want C on beat 1. So we need to add a chromatic note in there somewhere. So the first one that we could add is between A and the B. So we could play G, A, B flat, B, C. Okay, that gets us nicely onto beat 1 with the root note. So let's add both of those lines together. C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, B, C. Okay, let's try that with the track. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we landed nicely on beat 1 with the C. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and remember we've got that G on beat 1 of the second bar. So a nice, you know, strong chord tone. As well as that B flat, we could also try the G sharp between the G and the A. So if we do that, from the G we have G, G sharp, A, B, C. Okay, we're still working around the C major scale, but we're just adding a chromatic note between the 5th and that 6th. So with the whole line, C, D, E, F, G, G sharp, A, B, C. And you can put that G sharp wherever you want. 6th fret on the D string or the 1st fret on the G string. So, okay, let's hear that over the track. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now let's try the first line. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so both of those work fine, and we get a little bit of that jazzy spice in there with those chromatics. Now, because this all works a lot better rhythmically, you know, we're landing on the root note on the beat 1 there, we can just extend this over to octaves a lot easier. So if I was to work up with the B flat between the A and the B, we'd have. Okay, and with the G sharp. Let's listen to those, just those ascending lines with the backing track again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now with the G sharp. 2, 3, 4. Now, if we want to descend, we can try another couple of chromatic notes. So I wouldn't really recommend using the B flat in there because it's going to be on a much stronger beat in there. It's going to be on the beat 3, and it's going to give more of that dominant 7 kind of vibe over the major 7. It won't work as well. With these chromatics, you really want them to be on the weaker beats, you know, as leading tones. So when we come down, we're going to aim for that G. So 1, 2, 3. We can use the A flat or G sharp leading into the G there. So C, B, A flat, G. Just come all the way down. Okay, now you could also come down and use the D flat at the end there. So C, B, A, G, F, E, D, D flat, C. And again, that leads us nicely into the C on beat 1. The only problem with that one, and this isn't a big problem, but C, B, A, G, F, the F is going to be on the beat 1 there, E, D, D flat, C. But that's not too bad. You know, it's only for a fraction of a second. But if you're wanting to stick with those chromatic chord tones, the chord tones, the more consonant chord tones on beat 1, then you probably wouldn't want to do that. But you know, that F there, it just kind of extends it and adds that little bit of tension. So. Okay, so let's try both of those lines. So first of all, with the flat 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and now with the flattened second at the end. Okay, so you can hear there that F, so. Okay, but you can hear there how it actually just gives a little bit of that tension, so that you're waiting. You know, there's a bit of anticipation, you know, and then finally we land on the next bar. So it's not a big problem, and that gives us two lines using chromatic notes that allows us after 2 bars to land on that C on beat 1. So now we've got 2 different lines for ascent and 2 different lines for descent, so we can mix those up however we want. So let's say we're just working with 1 octave to begin with. I could come up through the C major scale with that B flat, and then come down with the A flat. I could come up with the A flat and maybe use the D flat on the descent. You know, any combination of the 2. And like I said, because we've now got those 8 notes for the whole line, we can just use them in 2 octaves as well. So I could come up, and then maybe come up, B flat, there was the A flat, and maybe the D flat at the end, however you want to mix them up. But you've got 2 lines, you know, there's not much, and you can just practice working up and down however you want with those, just to assimilate that vocabulary. So now I'll just play along to that track, just mixing up those lines, so we have a constant 2 octave scale working up and down with a variety of, you know, chromatic notes. And this is what you want to practice, just trying that up and down, and, you know, just putting them in on the fly, whichever ones you want to use. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're starting to get somewhere. We know the chord tones are the basic framework and the important points of resolution, and we can now add scalar notes and chromatics to help bridge those gaps and add smoothness in there. But things are still a little bit boring. You know, we're still playing a scale up and down. What we really need to do is start looking at phrases and vocabulary. To do this, we're going to break the scale and those chromatics up into smaller chunks, which we could consider as words if you want a direct comparison with language. For instance, here's a simple 4-note line starting on the root note and ending on the root note. Okay, just a basic phrase. And that's about as basic a line as you can get, but it's a start. Okay, that's pretty much a musical word, and the more words that we learn, the more that we can put them into sentences. So let's look at creating a few more words around the root to fifth movement. So let's start with the root note ascending to G. C, D, E, F, G. When we're on the fifth, if we want to descend back to the root note, we can simply come back down the scale again. So that's really simple, just G, F, E, D, C. Okay, so there we've just got two words. There's one word and... Okay, simple. Two words that we can put together to move from the root to the fifth and the fifth back to the root. So let's have a listen to how those words sound over our backing track. And I'm just going to add more and more as we go along. Okay, so our first words, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not much, but they're smaller fragments that we can build on, okay? So now let's try adding another word. So again, we're going to ascend up to that fifth. We're just going to play C, E, F, F sharp, G. Okay, so we're basically playing the notes of the chord tones there, and we're just adding that F and the F sharp into there as a little chromatic approach. Okay, so C, E, F, F sharp, G. Again, that's another word for getting from the root note to the fifth. So this time, I'll play along to the track. I'll start with the basic scale that we had. And next I'll add in our new word. And back. Now let's try a descending line. So we're going to work from the C down to the G. So we can come down, C, B, A. We need something to get us to the G so that we land on beat 1, so we can put A flat in there, just as a basic chromatic passing note. C, B, A flat, G, okay? And if we want to come back up from the G up to the C, we could use the same chromatic note. So we could use G, G sharp, A flat, A, B, C. So again, we've got two words there. We've got one bringing us down to the fifth. We've got one bringing us up from the fifth back to the root note. Okay, and if we played it up the octave, and then up, okay. So now we've got several words to play with. We can work up to the fifth there, two different ways. We can come down from the fifth with the scale. We can work down to the fifth. And we can work up from the fifth. Okay, so several different words, and what you want to do is just practice purposefully putting those in as much as you can, so that eventually they get assimilated into your vocabulary, so that you don't have to think about it anymore, so that you will just speak it as you would with words. When you're speaking in general language, you're not really thinking about every single word that you're going to say. You have the phrase that you want to express, and you just use the words as needed. And it's the same thing with these walking lines. You want them to be kind of second nature, so that you can just pull them out, and like I say, it's not even purposefully at that point, it's just intuitive. So now I'll just play over the track, just working around in that low area, just using those words, just trying to purposefully put them in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Scale, down the scale. Chromatic notes. Chromatic note. Down the scale as well. Okay. Now you might might have noticed there that I added an extra word in there. I played G, A, B flat, B, C when I was coming up. I did that accidentally. We've not played it yet, but we have played it in the scale, the original scale that we played when we first added chromatic notes. So remember, we came up and then we added A, B flat, B, C. Okay, and it's just another line you can use to come up from that fifth to the root note. G, A, B flat, B, C. So we're using the flat and seventh in there on the ascent. So from that G down there, G, A, B flat, B, C. Very, very common word. So that gives us another one. So we had that descent there, and then we can either come up G, G sharp, A, B, C, or G, A, B flat, B, C. Okay? Now, in the previous example, I stuck to this low area down here, but remember, you want to practice working through the different registers, working up through the octaves, and remember, you can also use the 2-octave scales that we looked at earlier. You know, you can use those to actually shift through into the different registers, because all that we did there is use those smaller fragments that we practiced later. So again, you want to practice with the track, just purposefully trying to move through the registers, trying to push yourself, and you'll mess up some of the times with these things, because you're going to get stuck in an area that you don't know too well. But because we've got these smaller words, you can just sit on one of those if you need to at one point. If you get up into this area and you don't know, where you are particularly, you're trying to get your bearings, just sit on one of those lines. Just sit around on that and then, carry on. So now I'll just play over the track, just mixing up all of those words that we've looked at through multiple octaves. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see that all I'm doing here is working on vocabulary by creating smaller phrases rather than always thinking up and down in terms of scales or arpeggios. It's all essentially the same thing really in terms of the nuts and bolts at play, but by thinking of that recurring root fifth movement, you get to break a static chord extended over 4, 8, 16, 32 bars, or even more, into short 1 and 2 bar lines. Now, obviously, you can apply this practice to any chord type, so I'd recommend practicing the 4 main chord types: major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, and minor 7 flat 5, and also in all keys. Don't just stick to C. The same concepts can all be applied. Just start with chord tones, then bridge the gaps with scales. So major for major 7, Mixolydian for dominant 7, Dorian for minor 7, and Locrian for minor 7 flat 5, then start to add the chromatic notes into the mix. You'll find that the same vocabulary can be used for most of those chord types with simple alterations to the chord tones in there. So the major third is changed to minor third on a Dorian, and so on. Okay, so that's a little advice on walking over a single chord. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and as always, the lesson material and tracks can be found over at TalkingBass. Then while you're there, go check out the lesson map where you'll find over 400 other free bass lessons on every topic imaginable. Okay, I'll see you next week.